Okay, Podsters, this is it. This is your tipping point, your moment to take action or live with never knowing what could have been. We all have that thing that we know we are meant to do that scares us, that we're not sure we can do, and that we know we need a little help doing. My Do the Thing Fall Retreat is happening October 13th through 15th in where else? Cape Cod, in the tranquil seaside town of Truro, where I've hand selected a beach house for 9 like-minded women to get together and do the thing. You already know that there's a life waiting for you on the other side of this thing. And this powerful, intimate 2.5-day workshop is exactly what you need. If you don't do it now, you probably never will. Don't live with regret. Do the thing. Click the link, fill out the very brief application. Let's hop on a call because I want to make sure it's the right fit for you. Together, let's do the thing. Welcome to Unmute Yourself, the podcast. I'm Nancy Medoff, keynote speaker, best-selling author, executive coach, and equity evangelist who literally wrote the book on women in confidence.
And I'm Beth Knaus, creative copywriter who works with female entrepreneurs who are done putting safe and general content out there and ready to walk the fine line between honoring their bold voices and perspectives and honoring their professionalism. We are on fire and on a mission to inspire and empower you, and who are we kidding? The world, to speak up, stand out, and get your seat at the table. If you're looking for straight talk and a weekly shot of confidence, you've landed in the right place.
Beth and I met while collaborating on my #1 bestseller, Unmute Yourself and Speak Up to Stand Out. We hit it off and we knew right away that we needed to keep these important conversations going so that women around the globe will speak up and stop building our own glass ceiling. So here we are, coming at you weekly with a perfect blend of realistic strategies, actionable tools, and real life stories to bring these important and somewhat controversial ideas to life. Doing so with humor, kindness, and the occasional shenanigans.
Get ready to feel empowered and inspired to speak up, to stand out, and to build your confidence toolkit. Note to men or women who are not working in a professional capacity, we see you too, and we promise you the conversations here will inspire you as well. So buckle up, folks, because here we go.
We're back, and I know that my microphone is awful. I am going to thank everybody in advance for their patience. Sometimes you have to do the best you have, the best you can with what you have.
That's right. That's right. And you know what? You have to embrace it as part of your whole self, Nancy, when something like your microphone is not working.
You do, well, you're just jumping right in, aren't you? You are jumping right in. Can I talk about the CNN episode before we do that?
Absolutely.
So Podsters, hello, everybody. Okay, so since the beginning of time, the happiness episode, which is an episode that we recorded several months ago. I'm going to look it up actually while we're talking so I can refer people there. The happiness episode was the #1. It has been the #1 seed in terms of our podcasts for, I don't know, decades, Beth? Decades.
Yeah, like from the get-go.
From the get. So I just went on to say, to take a look and say, I wonder if anything, like, how are we doing? Do we have anything new to share with the Podsters? And the CNN episode, the episode about Don Lemon and his comment about South Carolina governor running for president.
Oh, Curly, Hurley.
I can't even, this is bad. Anyway, the CNN episode, Nikki Haley, thank you very much. Yeah. The CNN episode is now neck and neck with the happiness episode. That's wild. This came out of nowhere. Yeah. So, hey guys, let us know, let us know what's up, because that's rare. Anyway, good to see you, Beth. CNN is okay. So that was March 7th is when we posted CNN on March 7th.
Yeah, it is right up there with the happiness curve. So the happiness curve was so popular. In fact, we reposted it right around New Year's, January 16th, because it was so impactful.
Yes.
Okay.
Very true.
Enough about that. So Beth did a great job, and then I ruined it, of segueing us to what we're going to talk about today. So this is really kind of cool. We're going to talk about a concept called the shadow self. And we're both really excited to talk about this. We have been batting around the idea for a while. And the shadow self, I'm going to give you my layman's version, basically says that which you detest in others or that which you find irritating in other people is actually a trait you have that either you've suppressed, you're denying, or you don't like. So I'm going to tell a little bit of a story about why I was hot on this, and then I'll read the real definition. So I was power walking with a friend, a dear friend who is one of the most fantastic people I know. She just exudes warmth and energy and calm, and she's just a delightful person to have in your life. So I was walking around a reservoir with her, and it was a while ago. It was very cold out, so it was either this past winter or the winter before. And I was talking about someone, and I was sharing a story, and she said, why is this such a big deal for you? Why do you care about this so much? Like, what's your problem? Not, she said it nicely, but, and I was like, well, and he does this, and he does that. And again, she's the kindest person I know. She just kind of went, that's exactly what you do. And I was literally stopped. And I'm like, what? And she said, oh yeah, you do that. That's exactly what you're trying to do, or that's exactly what you do, or something like that. She said, that's your shadow self. And I'm like, what? So after I got over the initial shock that I wasn't perfect, I'm only kidding. After I got over the initial shock, I really started thinking about it. And I truly can't remember what specifically we were talking about. I would share it. I really can't remember it, probably because I've suppressed it. I started really looking into it, and I was like, wow. Do you want to give the technical term, Beth? Because I know that I just talked like a lot.
The technical term of
shadow self? I mean, I have it. Do you have the definition at the handy or no? Oh, all right. Well, okay, great. I'll give it. Okay. So the shadow was a concept developed by Carl Jung, Jung. And what it says is it's a unconscious aspect of your personality that doesn't align with who you think you are or who you want to be. So you resist it and you project the shadow onto the other person or onto someone else. So it's basically like a blind spot that you project onto the other person. Fascinating. So I'm going to give it back to Beth to tell everyone why she finds it so fascinating before I continue.
So gosh, I don't even know where to start with this. I think that it's really interesting. But one of the things that I'm drawn to is that, you know how I feel about the word authentic. I'm on fire about this word because I feel like it's overused and wrongly used. And this just really solidifies that because, if you don't embrace that you have this other part of yourself, you are not being authentic. A whole person is an authentic person. And somewhere along the way, we've picked up this thing that we don't have flaws or we don't have subconscious things that we have, that we've brought along from our past, things that we were taught, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was another thing. I mean, I'm going to throw my mother under the bus here again, but you said it before on this podcast that, she was a face smacker. And I was not a loudmouth kid. So obviously there were times when I said things that she either felt that I was standing out more than her or whatever. And that's normally when it would happen. And it was always in front of other people. So I was so quiet, I think, at that time in my life, just a quiet. And I was little, I was always kind of petite. And I certainly didn't talk out like I speak up now, but stand up to speak out, speak up, stand out, all that stuff. So I think that for the longest time in my head, I was loud. Like I would say something and think I was loud and be like, "Oh, I have to tone that down. I have to tone that down." And it's not like I thought, or someone's gonna smack me in the face, but I think that was it, like, don't draw attention to yourself, don't show anybody up, right? Like, I'm always thinking about, I don't wanna sound cocky, or I don't wanna sound superior, or, that sort of thing, and that's a tricky walk, right? Because sometimes you are the authority, sometimes you are the expert, and you have a right to be that person, but I'm always very sensitive of, am I saying something that's making somebody else feel less than, and are they gonna lash out at me because of it? And I feel like I see that in a lot of female professionals, especially the ones I work with, that they don't wanna speak out all the way because they're afraid of the reaction of how they're gonna trigger other people.
Yes. So that's a lot. That's a lot to unpack. And I hate that expression and I use it all the time. So can we go back to when you said you don't speak up? So you were told, stop speaking up, right?
I guess I must have been, yeah.
And then you don't want to sound cocky. So would your mom say, don't be so cocky as well? Or
No, I mean, this was like an underlying thing,
mm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Not something, I mean, we could go into a whole session alone on this and what caused this thing, but, I think that she felt about many situations that I stole the attention.
So, right. Okay. So then right. So then you getting the attention equals bad. So subconsciously, this is all subconscious. So subconsciously, in the past, you wouldn't speak up because that was bad, right?
Right, and
Right.
I realized this, I don't know, maybe it was 5 or 10 years ago. I was down in New York and Long Island at, like, an impromptu kind of, like, reunion with a bunch of friends, and somebody said to me, "I remember you. You were that really quiet, shy girl. You were always really nice, but always really quiet." And I thought to myself, "Quiet? Do you know me?" And it's just interesting, right? That I don't see myself that way, but obviously at that point in my life, I was that way, and I
Mm-hmm.
know how I got there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is wild. So because I remember. So that's a great example. Well, that's a good example of why you're sensitive around it. So the epiphany for me came with the projecting it. So I was saying, he does this, he does this, he does this. And she was just like, what are you even talking about? That's exactly what you do. And I was stunned. So so it was, and I'm like, I do, or and I mean, this was a long time ago, and I'm still thinking about it. This was a very long time ago. So I think I found a really cool article. It's at betterup.com, and I'll link it in the show notes. That I think is a really good example, gives a really good example of kind of what it is. So let me find it really quick. Whoops,
Okay.
whoops, whoops,
Well,
whoops.
while you find that, I'm gonna say this. So I guess what I'm asking, I'm always on this like generational train about things, but so if I have that, is there something in my situation, my mother's shadow self, that makes her come at me or made her come at me at those times when I was stealing the attention?
Mm-hmm. So I would say yes, as in my professional opinion, as not a psychoanalyst.
Of course.
And if it's okay, can we put a pin in that, because we're
Yes.
going to get to that, and it's kind of impactful how we get to it,
Okay.
and you'll see in a second. So here's the example. So let's say that you were often teased for being talkative as a child. So you grew up thinking that you talk too much. and you started retreating, right? And weighing every conversation with, did I talk too much? Did I talk too much? So now it's, 30 years later, you're getting ready to present something, and someone says innocently, hey, be careful not to put too many words on the slide, right? Hey, be careful not to be too wordy on the slide. And you go ballistic. So that it wasn't the comments, it wasn't the presentation, it wasn't even the reality. It was that you were so emotionally invested in not being wordy, anything that threatens the way you present yourself to the world. So that, that goes back to the authenticity. So it's what you subconsciously, clearly, because I was blown away, what you subconsciously repress and don't want to acknowledge. Mm-hmm. And it alters your reality of how you want to be perceived to the world. It's almost like the id. Like, was it Freud that was the id and the ego, or was that Jung?
No, that's Freud, I think.
Yeah. So it's the id. It's like the bad part of your personality. That's a very bad description. Crazy, right?
Yes. Yeah. I also, in case anybody's heard other terms for it, and it might be more familiar, alter ego, lower self, mm-hmm. dark twin in like myths and biblical references. Yeah. So just in case, you might have heard that somewhere. And it's the opposite of persona.
Right. And we'll get to this. If you can identify and acknowledge and work on, and we'll talk about that, the parts of your personality that you don't feel are desirable, that in itself builds your self-confidence, because you're accepting yourself, or your confidence, because you're accepting yourself forever with everything, right? Your entire self, which speaks to authenticity.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all tied together. And this this little journey has been wild. So it's when I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can finish, Nance.
It's when you reject your shadow self, when you say, nope, I'm not going to be like that. Nope. That's when you start projecting it on other people. I'm going to give a really good example, and you guys have heard me say this before. I get really triggered. And this has been funny leading up to this episode. I get really triggered when there's drama of any kind of drama, triggered. And it's a pretty strong reaction. So like, the reaction doesn't fit the offense, right? It just doesn't. And I know that. So I was thinking, as we were getting ready for this, like, why is it such a trigger? Why is it such a trigger? Am I a drama queen? Have I been dramatic in the past? And I don't like that about myself. And I gotta grab my iPad. There it is. I started doing some of the work that I found on this, and I was like, wow. And I uncovered quite a bit. It was really pretty crazy. It was really pretty crazy. So have you seen other, like, real life examples of when this shows up, either for you or other people?
I don't know. That's definitely a big one for me.
Which one? The one?
Yeah, about the loud. And you know what? I mentioned it to you the other day that I can be in a situation somewhere and someone can be loud, and I'll turn to, like, my husband or one of my kids and be like, do I sound like that? Because I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be like that.
Right. So you don't like it in the other person.
Right.
Are you projecting what you're afraid you are to the other person, or what you don't want to be? Were they loud and?
Exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah. Right. Are they loud, or am I just sensitive to what is loud? It's just so interesting to, like, think about that and tie it in. And I think when you have something like that, and like you said, I think people can uncover, either one major thing, or you can uncover, a couple of different things. But I did not, in middle school or high school, ever do an oral report. As an A student, would not get up in front of the class and speak.
Yeah, it's understandable. Mm-hmm. It's understandable. And I wonder if when people speak up, I mean, I know you support people speaking up. I mean, I know that. I know you. I wonder if sometimes your initial reaction might be like, am I like that? Are they talking too much or a little too loud? Or I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on it now. And, I talk a lot now, like we're here on the podcast.
Mhm.
Weeks ago, I, spoke at a couple different networking meetings, and
Mhm.
I love to make video, right, for marketing purposes. And yeah, so I don't know. It's just interesting how it's changed a little bit.
So interesting. So interesting. So for those of you who are interested in this and want to like learn more about it, maybe explore it, it's called shadow work, and you can go to a therapist if you want, because it can, I did it for like 25 minutes and I was somewhat shook. And I'll talk about that in a second. I was explaining that to Beth in the green room. Or there's all kinds of stuff you can do. It's, on the World Wide Web.
Right.
Like I said, there's a few articles we'll link. So if you do, I mean, I want to explore more of this. I think it will help me build better relationships. I think it will help me. I'm pretty authentic. It will help me. I feel like if there is this shadow self, if we believe my friend and if we believe Carl Jung, then, and I was floored. Well, that's a self-awareness that's a gap in how self-aware I think I am versus how self-aware I really am. And I think it will really just help me have more clarity. I mean, whoops. So you might be surprised, podsters, that according to the experts, to start understanding your shadow self, you have to go back to your childhood. I mean, it's wild. So there were a few recommendations, and I did some of them, and I liked a lot of them. So, it was, one of them was to, think back. One of was to keep a journal, and make it a daily practice to sit down, and there's some prompts. I like an audio journal. I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast. I don't unfortunately have, let me rephrase. I'm not able to prioritize sitting down in front of a journal right now. So instead I'll do an audio journal. So I would encourage people to do it that way. So some of the journal prompts, I mean, listen to these. What are the worst traits someone can have? And when do you demonstrate these traits? Listen to this. What memories are you ashamed of? This is some pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah. Get a therapist, people. Don't do this alone.
What emotions typically bring out the worst in you? When was the last time you self-sabotaged? What are some lies you previously told yourself? Oh, this was the one. Okay, so then I'll talk about what I mentioned earlier. What's your worst memory from childhood? I mean, this is some pretty deep stuff. So as I was doing, I started thinking about these. And as I was thinking about them, I noticed myself, I was having a physical reaction. Like I noticed myself breathing much heavier. When I get anxious, I go to my yoga breathing. I think it's called Ujjayi breath. And it's subconscious. I don't even know I'm doing it. So I realized that I was doing this, and I was very anxious, and I was starting to get stressed out. So clearly there's something up that, I'm not saying there was a massive trauma. I'm saying that I don't want to deal with this. I didn't want to deal with it, and I don't want to deal with it. I will, but I didn't want to, and I don't. And as I started thinking about, I mean, these are really probing questions. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I would recommend that people do it maybe one question a week or one question a day. I mean, I was going through all the questions, and I was having full on anxiety.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I found interesting, because this is similar to what I talk about sometimes when I'm writing stuff with people, is that, a lot of this healing that goes along with this has to do with self-awareness and self-acceptance. And if you're triggered by something and it sets you into anxiety or to feel depressed, those are feelings that you have when you're dealing outside the present,
Mm-hmm.
about the future, or you're dwelling over the past.
Mm-hmm.
When you are tuning into your senses, or it's almost like the Mel Robbins 5-second rule a little bit. If you're tuning into your senses and you stop for a second and say, what do I feel? What do I smell? What do I taste? What do I hear? What do I see? That places you right in the present. And it makes you much clearer on the details around you in the moment.
Totally. I mean, yeah.
You can have better self-awareness that way. But normally when we're triggered into this thing, the present is not where we're standing, because we're triggered and we're off into some other thing.
Yeah. So are you saying, are you saying don't do it? Are you saying be present, or are you saying understand that it's temporary?
Present, because that helps you be self-aware. You can't really be self-aware of what's happening in the moment if your mind is somewhere else, because you've been triggered by one of these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's wild. Oh, here's another question. Who, this is rhetorical. Who has let you down the most in your life? I mean, these are like, I'm reading through these and I'm like, I'm really not ready for all of this. It was way too much. And yes, and everything I read said be patient. And again, I would recommend that if you're going to do some of this work, that you that you pace yourself.
Right.
But if you really want clarity and you really want to get clear on why this is triggering for you, or maybe why you have the low self-esteem, this will help with low self-esteem. It's legit. Oh, so the other thing, this is what I wanted to say, to go back to your grandma. It's called a family tree exercise. And I started to do it. It's where you write down and build out your family tree, right? Everybody, and all of their characteristics of all those people. And then you look at what characteristics you have, because you probably pick some up from the people that raised you or the people that you were around the most. So I did that. I did an abbreviated version, and it was pretty wild. And when I did it, here's what's interesting. I did positive and negative characteristics of certain people. The negative characteristics, I'm like, I do that. And it's not as simple. I don't know if I'm doing a good job explaining this. It's not as simple as, oh, well, my dad did this, and so my dad's impatient, and so am I. It's not that simple. This is like, of all the things that this person did or didn't do, let's just go negative. Of all the things that you don't like about this person, or that you wish they did differently, you sure you don't do any of those? And when you really take a look at it, I found a couple things that are the things that I want to work on the most, that I'm like, yep, okay, now and I didn't know that until I did this. I don't know. I feel like I'm not doing a good job explaining it.
No, I totally understand that. Totally understand.
It's wild.
I did see one quote I want to share. I know I'm watching the time, but Carl Jung said, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow."
Wow.
So don't you think this is so typical when you see people who are resisting stepping into the spotlight, myself included? It's because the brighter the light, the darker your shadow gets, right? The more you put yourself out there, the more you're, by default subjected to opinion and judgment and all these other things that can trigger your shadow self.
Interesting. So where are you going with that?
Well, I'm saying that since I'm becoming, famous, I might want to do some shadow work.
I mean,
as the light increases and my shadow grows, I should probably be ready.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too, I had a young quote too, and it was really good, but I can't remember it. I think of all these great things and then I don't write them down. Anyway, I think what helps me is with this type of work, what helps me is I'm not putting a value on this trait. It simply is. Now I can put desirable and undesirable, but I won't say good or bad. It simply is. So the minute I do that, I can have real conversations with myself and I can really go deep and say, okay, it's allowing yourself the grace to not judge yourself.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, here's the deal, folks. We are human and we are flawed. We are not going to be perfect. If you are going to be perfect, you are not authentic. It's not a thing, right? Perfect is a word like normal, I have always felt. It's like, let me say this. Can you be your perfect? Yeah, I think you can, but I think you have to be careful with what that means because
I don't even think you can be your perfect because you're not perfect all the time.
You're right. It's not all the time.
Right. Right.
So yeah, wow. We might have to have a part 2 to this.
So I would love to do a part 2. I want to make sure that our podsters are up for it because this is a little deep.
It is deep.
Deep. Speaking of perfect, would you like to end on a lighter note?
Of course.
Okay. So by the way, we will put links to all these things in the articles and everything in the show notes, and we'd love to hear if anybody had any epiphanies around this, because for me this was big. This was big. So speaking of perfection, and some of you who follow me on Instagram saw this. I've committed to doing 2 weeks in a row of yoga. I can only commit to 2 weeks in a row, but yes. So nonstop. I was walking into the studio. I went to the studio yesterday. So I'm in Florida, and that's why my sound is terrible, because I don't have my mic. You heard a water police taxi earlier in the background. I don't have any of my equipment. Anyway, I also didn't have any yoga pants. So I wore a golf skirt to yoga. I had a golf skirt, like the skirts. For the men that are listening, these are like skirts, but you have shorts on underneath. And I was walking in and I almost didn't go in because I'm like, I don't have yoga pants. I don't want to do yoga in a skirt. Like I just don't want to do yoga in a skirt. And I'm like, no, Nancy, you committed to yourself. Drop the perfectionism. Nobody cares. And go in. I went in and it was probably the best yoga class I've ever had, ever.
Nice.
Ever.
Nice.
And our mutual friend, Kathy Ripley Green, commented and she said, I did a story about it. Yoga doesn't care what you're wearing.
That's so Kathy Ripley Green.
So Kathy Ripley Green. And also, for me, the lesson was if I had not gone because I didn't look the part and I didn't have the right equipment, like you do the best that you can with what you have. That is it. That is all.
Absolutely.
So, so that was my perfection story. So I think we're gonna. Are you gonna do any of these, by the way? You gonna do any of these exercises?
I might. Yeah, I think it's really interesting.
It was something. I'll tell you. It was something. Have a beverage of your choice handy when you do it.
Okay.
Is all I'll say.
Excellent.
All right. What do we have coming up? Should we talk about what's coming up? Coming up, we have. We have the challenge of tough love as a woman.
Oh, yes. That's going to be a goodie.
Great. And we have bad bosses.
That's right. Oh, gosh. Bad bosses.
How not to be one, how not to work for one, and what do you do if you're stuck with one?
Right.
Love it.
Especially if it's you.
I mean, there's a couple stories in there. That's going to be a good one. Should be a good one. All right, Podsters.
We're out.
Good to see you, Bethy.
You too.
Peace out. That's a wrap, Podsters. If you were thinking of someone as you were listening to this, share it.
If you nodded along and even shouted out a couple of yes, leave us a review. Please, please, please. If you want to make sure you don't miss next week's episode, hit that follow button.
And you can find us everywhere. And if you would like to learn more about us and exactly what we do, take a look in the show notes for our deets. See you
next week.
Oddsters.